Wes and Ted's Excellent Conversation, a podcast about teaching, learning, and anything else that pops into Wes and Ted's heads.
Welcome to Wes and Ted's Excellent Conversation. Today is January 20th, 2021. Most notably the day after the SAT got rid of the SAT essay.
That is SAT the most interesting newsworthy thing happening on this
day. Of all the things that happened
right.
today. Actually, one thing before we get into it, but the one thing that did happen, well, obviously, today was the inauguration of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. I heard that I missed it. I meant to see it, but I heard that Sonia Sotomayor mispronounced her first name. Like, I don't know how
mispronounced her own first name.
I'm just Kamala, maybe. I don't know.
Oh no,
Kamala.
No. Kamala, don't break this heart. No, that's not good. I did not see Justice Sotomayor. I watched a fair bit of it, but I missed it.
I meant to watch it, and gosh, this is hilarious. I'm going down like tangent after tangent after tangent. Like normally tangents are well organized.
If we're on tangents of justices mispronouncing stuff, can you just spare a moment for Justice Barrett and poignant?
Oh, what?
Did you catch that when it happened?
No.
Yeah, it was poignant instead of poignant. I mean, I know I sound like a total asshole. Well, maybe I just
no, you don't.
A total asshole when I say
no,
that. But
neither. No, that's not.
When she did that, it was just like, wait, but you're a serious person and you have serious intellectual conversations with serious people. How could you not have been? I don't know.
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Yeah,
sorry.
That was.
I feel like I'm today. I feel like I'm able to talk about former President Donald Trump, like in a way that is like I've never been able to even say the last three words together. I'm not sure if I've ever said them together until today. You know what I mean? Because suddenly, like, with 2 hours to go, I was like, yeah, this feels right. I can say this. But my friend John and I were passing around like most embarrassing moments, right, of his presidency. And John's submission was when he called Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, Tim Apple.
Tim Apple, yeah.
It's a really subtle joke. It's really it's subtle but very funny. You know. Yeah. So here's my historical fun fact that I have to share it. I have to, and eventually we'll introduce ourselves too. Kamala Harris is not just the first female in the executive branch. First, of between president and vice president, not just the first Black American vice president, not just the first Indian American president or vice president. Okay, she is also the first ever former Tutor Ted client in the executive branch. So we're all pretty proud of that today.
Well done. Yes, well done. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
That's pretty great. Yeah. Right on. Yeah. So I assume you're talking about not Kamala herself, but
yes,
she was the parent.
She was the step parent of. I don't know. I'm not going to say the name because that you shouldn't do that.
You practically already have. Though, right?
I've implied it strongly. Sure. Yeah.
Totally.
But I don't want to it's not my name.
Good for you.
Yeah. So
good for you. No, I'm glad to hear that. Right on.
We were on the scene. We were on the scene when she was running for California Senate, and so in the time that we were going to her house, the Secret Service started showing up.
Going to her house. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Which is also old school, right? back when you used to go to people's houses.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's that is one of the I don't know if perk. It's one of the properties of this job, right? Is that you meet some people you would never meet in any other context,
right.
And I think that's super cool. I've really gotten a lot of enjoyment out of that, but I've got a fair bit of stress too. It's always intimidating when you're talking to someone and that in 60 seconds they make more money than you're going to make in your lifetime or whatever it may be,
right?
Or they're going to make incredibly important decisions and you're just helping one kid at a time or whatever the situation may be.
That's an interesting one. We could go so deep on that. I wouldn't hate.
Yeah, I thought I'd leave that hanging in the air and see if you bid. And so I'm glad you did. Thank you. But yeah, I think that's super cool. I think it's really neat that you get a chance to see something you would never see before, or see otherwise, I should say.
Yeah.
It's super cool.
Yeah. I've got so many thoughts, but let's introduce ourselves first, or rather let's introduce each other. So the man who's sitting next to me, remotely is Wes Carroll.
Sure.
WesCarroll.com, 2 R's and 2 L's. Really an exceptional math tutor, in particular math and problem solving and thinking. He's a nerd in the best possible way, I would say. He is
I'm certainly a nerd in an authentic way.
He's a multiple time winner of the MIT puzzle tournament.
MIT Mystery Hunt, which was actually this last weekend.
Oh, what happened?
Yeah. Oh, we'll get into that.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry. Real quick non sequitur. At one point earlier in our friendship, I said to Wes, and this was true at the time. It's been updated. It's updated. I'll give the update too. But I said, we were talking about crossword puzzles, and I said I know a guy who has won the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament 5 times. And you were like, well, which one? Because I know the other one. And mine was Dan Thayer, and yours is Tyler Hinman.
Tyler Hinman, that's right.
And I'm not bragging, I'm not gloating, but Dan has gone on to win 3 more titles.
Yeah, your guy beat my guy. No, I got it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Did I tell you about the story when I challenged Tyler Hinman to a crossword off, as it were, a race to?
Remind me if you haven't. I want to hear it again.
I used to host these game nights at my place, and he was over one time, and I don't remember, so a Monday crossword, right, on the New York Times, that's it's pretty easy.
And those guys are solving those in under a minute, right?
Well, I don't know what the timing is, but yeah, you're right. It's not a lot of time, right? And he offered just for fun to race me where I got a head start. And we agreed on some time that I really thought, I have a chance of being able to finish the crossword before that lead elapses, right? It was 3 or 4 minutes, or I don't know what it was.
You had to get the deal done before he
totally. And it was just before he can pick up his pencil, right? And I thought, well, that's generous of him to kind of give me enough of a lead that he might not even be in it. And for whatever reason, I couldn't finish it in that time, and so he got to pick up the pencil, and he wound up winning. But the thing about it that was so fascinating for me is my bottleneck, as with any other regular Joe, right, is figuring out what the clues mean. And I'm glancing at the clues, answering them, writing them down, whatever. His bottleneck was how fast he could move the pencil. Yeah. People were, and I glanced over at one point, and it was literally one of those things where, I'm not exactly sure what his eyes were doing, but the pencil simply never stopped. It was like he'd memorized the grid and was just writing it down,
transcribing
as fast as he could.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, he was just transcribing it, right? Because the part of solving the thing was just it was just so trivially easy that was just a tiny bit of his brain power. And I thought that was such an interesting. It was an interesting experience, right? It was totally fun. And for him to, just give me such a lead and then wipe the floor with me anyway was fun for everyone there, I think. But, but also it was such an interesting metaphor on sort of the levels of excellence.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I can wipe up a Monday crossword, in nothing flat, air quotes, right?
Yeah.
But there's a whole other level there, which I found super interesting. But total digression. Tutor Ted Dorsey, my conversational partner. Let's see now. You started tutoring not long after you finished at Princeton. Is that right? Princeton, wasn't it?
Yep, that's correct.
And in fact, you were probably already doing some of that work in some context while you were an undergrad and all that kind of good stuff.
Yes, I was a drastically underpaid tutor while I was in college.
Sure. That makes total sense. That's how it goes. But since then, you've hung your shingle as Tutor Ted, tutorted.com, and you head up a team of tutors in the LA area. But of course, you work with people across the country and worldwide. Yeah. And you've written, a number of books, and it's interesting to me too because the kinds of books that you have written most of, I think, are one of those that are sort of a combination of practice tests and sort of strategy.
Yeah, lessons.
How to think about this stuff. Yeah, totally. And I have to give you a shout out here. So I used to be an SAT tutor primarily, as half of bodsat.com back in the day. And we'd often get those books to review and so on, and it was always one of those things where we'd look through the strategy, right? And at BODSAT we were dealing with students in a certain score range, so a lot of like what we were really looking for is, okay, what's the advice people are giving that don't apply to our students, so that we can like deprogram our students in the beginning with any bad advice they may have heard.
Oh yeah.
And then it was also like there was just this running joke, which you'll appreciate, which is that when you get official material from the SAT or ACT people, right, it's super well vetted, not just not to contain mistakes, but also to be thoughtful questions. I don't know how else to say it, right? Every answer choice has been considered, and every possible, mistake has been considered, and all this kind of stuff. And you read so many of these test books, and it's like, gosh, they're just cribbing the material, changing a couple numbers, and not really thinking about the deeper implications here. And two things that really struck me about your work were, one, like I'd read your strategy, and if it didn't apply to our kids, like it was pretty clear that you knew that, and you were trying to set the signposts. You know what I mean? Like it was good advice done conversationally, such that our students would have read your book and been like, yeah, okay, that piece doesn't apply to me, this other piece applies to me, and they would have been able to navigate it. Which is huge, right? Because so often it's just like, do this thing, and our kids would have read that and sort of gone down the wrong path, but not in your case. And then the other thing is, I remember reading a couple of those questions. Oh yeah, no, of course. I remember reading a couple of those questions also, and just thinking, oh wow, this is a guy who gets it. Like he understands that there are layers here and there's depth here. And I thought, man, I would not want to write this book, because that seems like a ton of work to do it right.
It's so hard.
So God bless you.
I finished so in total we've published 7 books. 3 of them pertain to the old SAT, and one of those was the second edition of the other one. So whether you can count that or not. But anyway, we have these 4 books right behind me that you can't see if you're just listening on audio.
Oh yeah, I see them. Yeah, no, I got them. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
And I
sort of artfully,
just casually
arranged.
thrown
around,
casually.
That's
totally. They used to be over this shoulder. Now they're a little further over, so you can actually see them.
Nice. Okay, good. I like it.
After I finished the last 2, the bottom 2, I said, never again. You know what I mean? If they change, if they radically overhaul the test, which interestingly is the thing we're talking about today anyway, which is convenient. Totally. And now I should probably take the essay chapters out of there. In fact, I have to. Yeah, that's funny. I hadn't even thought about the books. Fantastic.
Good times. But if you buy one of those books, and if you buy an SAT prep book, right? And they're always like 500 pages or whatever they are. And if you throw away 480 of them and get 20 valuable pages, like it's still worth the purchase. You know what I mean?
Yes, like 20 pages is like miraculous value. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Did we do a good job introducing ourselves? The one thing I want to add on one thing about you and Tyler Hinman, which is that like, Tyler Hinman can blast you on the crossword, and you would absolutely run circles around him in math. Is my guess. I don't know how good his math game is, but I think the chances are, if it comes to problem solving or clever problem solving, he wouldn't have a chance against you.
So I know from experience he's no slouch there. I don't know that I go toe to toe with him, but I appreciate the thought nonetheless. And that's a decent segue into the MIT Mystery Hunt, which did happen this weekend, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Please.
We got. I don't know my team's final standing, but
don't know because it's not available yet, or
no, I just haven't looked yet. Right, I know we didn't win, right, but I don't know what ranking we had yet. I haven't checked it. It's probably available, and I should check it out. But kind of like, is pole position the expression? Like in a lot of cases, what you want is number 2, so that you could, we did really well, but we don't have to write next year's. Increasingly as you do this, it's like, because I've been on the writing team for a couple of these, and I haven't, been a major contributor to any of the writing teams. And even as a minor contributor, it's like, wow, this is a ton of work. But the team this year that hosted it put on just an absolutely fabulous puzzle hunt. And I was just really, really pleased, because I feel like all year long I say to my students, listen, there are certain strategies you have to apply, certain heuristics, certain modes of thought, certain mindsets. There's certain things you have to do in order to be a good problem solver, right? Yeah, obviously talent is a thing, but like there's craft in it too. And there was this one puzzle I did this weekend, Ted. It was so fun. Like it was this super intricate, super hard, like just crazy town kind of thing.
Wow.
And I sat with it for 5 hours, which is, it's even by Mystery Hunt standards, it's like, okay, that's a commitment, right?
Yeah.
but I just applied craft for 5 hours.
Wow.
You know, it was just like I was just disciplined about, okay, what questions should I be asking now? What are the answers to those questions, and what do those answers imply? And I just did that for 5 hours until I wrestled an answer out of that puzzle. You know, I shouldn't speak as though I did it alone. I was, you know, working with a small sub team, but it was so it was just so gratifying to feel like, yeah, this stuff that we talk about all the time, you know, it's a real thing, right? Like I watched it with my own eyes where it was like, okay, I'm stuck. What do you do when you're stuck? Oh, you do this, you know, and I would just, every time I would hit a brick wall, it was like, okay, how do you get past this brick wall? Well, there's a playbook for that. Okay, let's, you know, eat your own dog food, as they say, right? Take a page from the playbook and figure it out. And it was so cool. And it was like, oh yeah, that's the answer.
Fascinating.
Yep.
I'm curious about within the 5 hours, like, did you feel a sense of predictability in terms of like, I'm crossing off all the possibilities so that I eventually will land at the right outcome? Does that make sense? Like, you know, was it orderly enough that you knew you'd get there eventually?
No, it was one of those things. So an interesting thing was a really nice feature of this puzzle, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people solving it, is like you're looking at this thing and you can smell that you're close to the solution. Like you're looking at the presentation of the puzzle and you're like, okay, I don't know what the answer is here. I don't even know what the first step is. But I can see there's just something about it, like it's matching a pattern way in the back of my head where I can see like the answer is in that direction, kind of. And let me just walk in that direction for a while and kind of see what that looks like later, you know? Okay. And you stumble around for a little while and then, you've futzed with it for a while longer and you're like, okay, now I have a slightly clearer sense of what this is going to be, but I still don't know what the answer is. And the thing that was so funny is of those 5 hours, there were probably 20 minutes in aggregate out of those 5 hours where I had the feeling of like, yep, okay, I can see it from here. Mm-hmm. Whether it was like the final answer or the next step. Most of the time it was like, I just got to have faith here, you know? Mm-hmm. And then like 20 minutes later, it'd be like, yep, I am clearly closer. You know, there were occasional confirmations and stuff. Mm-hmm. But the thing that was so interesting is that like, and you and I both see this in our students all the time, right? The majority of the time you're staring at this thing, trusting that you have the right playbook in your head because you're not getting any feedback in the moment.
Right.
Like you don't know that what you're doing. It's not like when you're adding 2-3 digit numbers and it's like, okay, you know what to do. You may not know the answer, but you know you're going to get there.
Right.
Whereas in this case, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do the things and it might work and it might not. And all I can do is just
have faith in my problem-solving procedure. Yeah, that's so interesting.
Exactly.
Was there something that you were looking for? Was what I mean? Was there like an aspect to it that like once you was there like an aha moment? Like, oh, this tool will work, or this this is the code. Like I don't even know because I haven't seen these problems ever really.
Sure. Well, okay. So, but you've solved crossword puzzles. Maybe you've done cryptic crossword puzzles too. Are you familiar with that?
I've done like cryptograms. I don't know, like where you're matching.
Oh no, that's a different thing. Okay. That's a different thing. Well, so in a cryptic crossword puzzle, they give you a clue, except that not to get too far down this particular rabbit hole. Our listeners are like, oh, we skipped ahead. Whatever. Like in a regular crossword clue, it's a clue and it clues the thing. In a cryptic crossword clue, part of it clues the thing, and part of it sort of describes some word play that you could do to arrive at the answer in a different way.
Okay.
Is
so, for example, like, are they two separate clues?
They're two separate clues. Like one of them clues like it's richer than milk and it comes out of a cow and it's like, okay, that could be cream, right? And then the other part of the clue will be like, take the first letter from this word and add it to ream and you'll get the answer, kind of thing. Okay. Except it's not that straightforward because although there are two separate clues, right? They don't explicitly tell you which one is the clue and which one is the wordplay, and they're jammed together into a single sentence, and you have to figure out which half is which. And sometimes it's extremely like it's a challenge to figure out where to split this thing.
Interesting.
Okay, so
that's fun.
Anyway, that's one of the things. So it turns out in this particular puzzle that I'm talking about, spoiler alert for the people who are going to go back and look at the MIT Mystery Hunt, whatever. But in this case, they were clues where part of some of the clues worked in the way that I just described. Mm-hmm. and the other part worked in a completely separate way,
Mm-hmm.
of which there were several separate ways. And it wasn't split it in half. It was like one clue was inserted into the middle of the other, right? So it was like this, like you'd look at this thing and you'd like, this looks like a cryptic clue, but not these other words over here, right? And you're like trying to figure out, what can this mean? So there was this nesting thing of like, not only was there the clue was split into two parts, but that was just a piece of the clue itself. And then you're like, okay, what else could the other part be? And you're just beating your head. And it's one of those things where you're beating your head against this clues until you find one of them where you're like, well, now wait a minute. If we split it in this way, then we have this kind of puzzle here and this other kind of puzzle over here. Could that be a thing? And then, everybody in the chat room is like, well, now what if, what would that mean? And you start figuring all that stuff out. And then before you know it, right, an hour and a half later, you've got a spreadsheet that lists all the ways that you have to deal with all the various clues. And it's like, great, now we've cracked the first layer of this puzzle. Now what? It's like this masochistic and yet totally enjoyable, thing. Anyway,
I'm thinking,
as you can tell, I had a good time.
That's great. That's awesome. And I like that you had a good time, because I think that it tells us about the purpose of puzzling, right? Like the reason you're doing it is because you have a mind that is, that needs stimulation, you know what I mean? That needs to be sort of like, provoked into solving something. Like you have the capacity to do it. And it just kind of tells you something about humanity, that we basically have these engines that rev pretty hot, pretty fast. And, this is no knock on the puzzle competition, because I do plenty of stuff that is a total waste of time. But like,
no,
there's no reason
right.
to do it. There's no reason to do it. You know
right.
what I mean?
It's totally entertainment. And I'm glad you said what you said, because it's not like, oh, I have one of these minds that needs to be challenged in this way. No, we all have minds that lean in this direction, right? I've done some training and practice so that this particular kind of challenge is especially fun for me, whatever.
Yeah.
But like, we are thinking machines, we're pattern matching machines, or at least a part of us is, right? And I think, one way or another, we're all problem solving all day long. And in that sense, sure, it's, there's no purpose in doing this thing. And yet, it's an opportunity to scratch that itch in a place where it doesn't really matter. Like, if you don't solve this problem, nothing bad's going to happen. You know what I mean?
Right.
And in that sense, it's a real relief, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to try and solve this thing that is genuinely hard, like many of the other problems that I have in my work and in my life and whatever. It's just that, like, no one cares if I win here. You know what I mean? And that's very,
it's kind of a safe space. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to say something controversial, I think. Is it controversial? I'm going to say
it's about time. Jeez, get in there.
I'm going to say it. We'll find out if it's controversial. Maybe no one cares.
Okay.
I, for the exact same reason, I understand and appreciate the motivation of the QAnon people. I have absolutely.
Oh yeah, no, the QAnon is a total puzzle hunt.
It's a puzzle hunt, and it's.
Oh yeah, totally.
And their motivations are actually good. They're well intentioned, I should say. They're trying to prevent what they think is like this pedophilia ring that doesn't exist. That's the problem, right there.
Whatever.
That break in reality is like a really important and sad one that, like, is divorcing a group of people from the rest of us, right? In a way that's like this potentially really problematic for the future. But separate from that, ignoring that break from reality, like they want to solve a problem in the world. They want to have a conspiracy to unlock. And it's like, yeah, I get it. I get that.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Problem solving is a thing. There are a number of sort of really strongly pro-social aspects to that whole thing, at least when you look at it from the right angle, for sure. And it comes back to, like, you saw the John Nash movie, right? Russell Crowe, Beautiful Mind.
Yeah.
Like it's the same thing, right? It's like, I don't know, equivalency, whatever, but like it's certainly a related thing. This idea of, okay, given certain inputs, there are certain, ways to behave that are, very positive, right? But if your inputs are flawed, then okay, well, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah. So, gosh, this is interesting. So humans are problem solvers, right? So that's the premise we're saying right now, is that humans have a strong instinct for solving problems.
And I'd say that kind of on a tactical level too. I guess I'd say that like part of our problem solving thing is pattern matching. Like I think of us as problem solving machines, not because I think of brains as computers, but because there are parts of your brain that will try to solve problems independent of whether you have judged it a problem worth solving or not.
Yes.
You know,
okay. Yeah.
Like we don't like there are parts of our brains that are always spinning in that direction, but there are not necessarily parts of our brains that are constantly asking the question, is my data good? Am I solving a worthwhile problem? It's just like, it's a machine, it's doing its thing, you know, and there's some training or will that needs to be exerted to get it pointed at the right stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. That's a good point too. Yeah. Gosh, do we go further down that one? No, I think
we ought to at least mention the SAT thing and get in there, and we can always kind of jump back into whatever. But so the SAT folks, the College Board announced that they're no longer going to even provide the optional essay component of the SAT. And they've also announced a cancellation of all of the so-called SAT subject tests, which back in the day were called the achievement tests, which are subject-specific 60-minute tests meant to demonstrate a facility in, you know, physics and biology and chemistry. And
after that, they were called
Spanish,
SAT2 tests. So it was achievement tests, then SAT2, then SAT subject tests.
That.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The SAT2, right. Yeah, totally. And so they've been around for, I don't know, 30, 40 years? A long time. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe longer? I don't even know.
I have an old book that was probably copyright like 85 or, you know what I mean? Something around then. So they've been around since then.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, I thought we'd talk about that. I thought we'd talk about the fact that these two, you know, like things that have been kind of fundamental are now no longer. I for one am, you know, I'll just come clean and say I'm extremely enthusiastic about getting rid of the SAT subject tests. I think they're completely
really.
I'll tell you why.
Really?
I'll tell you why.
Oh, okay.
Because they, fun as the content was for people who knew it, there was not one class in America that angled its teaching at those tests. I suppose if you learn Spanish, then the Spanish.
Wait, isn't that a good thing though?
I think it makes it a pointless measure. You know, like I think it makes it so that there's absolutely no reason to administer that test, because the whole point of the test is like it is an achievement test. Achievement means you've achieved the learning that was intended, but there never was learning intended. There never was, the learning process was never aimed at that particular test.
Oh no, I'm gonna totally argue with you on this one. Yeah, no, I totally am. And the funny thing is, I think we're going to find that we agree on most of the premises, but I think we come to different conclusions here. Although maybe by the end of the conversation, I'll discover that my mind has changed.
And real quick, I'm not saying I didn't like the test. In fact,
Oh no, I know we both love the test. We both enjoyed that stuff.
I'll humbly brag and say that I got a perfect score on the literature and math level 2 tests. You know, like.
Oh, you got a perfect score on the math too. I thought that was going to be my claim to fame in this conversation.
Sorry, man.
Okay, fair enough. No, that's you're a smart guy. So
I skipped question 50 because I was tired. I got to 50 and it was this like recursive function, and I was like, let me go back and flip back to the rest of the test, and I was like, I got an 800. I'm not doing this question.
That's pretty sweet, dude. Right on. That is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, so where to start? So first of all, I think maybe I misunderstood your premise, but I think that you're implying, or at least I'm inferring, that if I'm going to be tested on a thing, it's only fair that I be taught the thing, which on its surface seems very reasonable. Okay. I want to suggest, so here's my beef with the ACT. Let's start there. My beef with the ACT is that they are testing you on whether you learned the stuff that schools teach. Okay?
Right.
And
that's the idea.
On its surface, seems pretty reasonable. I have a beef with that, which is that it presumes that what schools teach is a more worthy goal than what you should know. It doesn't provide room for the schools to get it wrong. Like there's so much freight in what I'm saying here. All right, let me unpack this a little. So, I think we've all heard the story, and I think you and I believe the story by and large, that there's a bunch of, I'll just stick to math for now. This probably applies to U.S. history too. Well, I don't know. People could argue. I'll stick to math. There's a lot of math that you learn in high school, not because you're going to use it in your everyday life, because, you know, you're not going to need algebra 2, generally speaking, in your career, right? We learn it because thinking in a certain way with a certain level of rigor is something that you're going to use in your everyday life, even if you wind up applying it to some other thing. And we want to have kind of a, gosh, dare I say it, like value neutral practice, a set of practice material to develop these skills with. And then later on, you can apply those same skills to your chosen field, which could be math, but like is probably going to be something else, right? And like, because that's the classic answer to, you know, Mr. Teacher, when am I ever going to use this quadratic formula thing? Right. The answer is, well, you're kind of not. And yet at the same time, like the notion that a procedure can help you in a wide variety of situations to answer a question that otherwise would be unanswerable, and it requires a certain level of meticulousness in applying the steps of the process. Okay, well, you know,
which
that's
is going
a
back to
story
the
that we all
problem-solving
have
conversation at the beginning. You know, that basically, like, you're learning. You know, you can learn techniques and tools and then apply them in various situations.
Yeah, weren't you telling me the other day that like when you this is going to be embarrassing if I'm misremembering, but like one of the benefits of practicing some intellectual field is that it's not merely that you're learning to be good in that subfield. It's that you are learning how to become smart or how to become knowledgeable in areas in general, right? Like, and that's like, for me, it comes back to the idea of like people who say that learning your second language is your hardest. Right. The idea of like, once you've learned a second language, your third is like, you kind of know how to do it to some degree. And so, you know, you look at these people who speak 17 languages or, you know, the hyper polyglots or whatever, and you got to realize that like, okay, great. That's an intellectual achievement that is, you know, I'm never going to touch that as cool as that would be. But on the other hand, like learning number 17 is not nearly as hard as learning number 4, you know, because at this point you kind of have the feel for how this process goes. Right.
I think it works. I think it definitely works that way. I think it works simultaneously in like a totally opposite way as well, which is that I think sometimes when you're studying a particular field, you go down the rabbit hole, you know what I mean? And that's a good thing. That can be a good thing in academia because you learn how to speak the language the way that other people in that field do, you know what I mean? So you go to like the depths of that field. Say, you know, if this is true in education, this is true, I believe probably in like astrophysics, right? That like astrophysicists know the stuff that we don't know that's just within astrophysics. And if we wanted to learn it, we could, but because we're not in that field, it's not as like, you know, we don't have the vocabulary right now, the terminology.
Well, okay. Let's be clear. Like, let's use astrophysics as the example of stuff we don't know, right? You got to figure that just like any subject, there's some stuff in there and there's some methods in there, right?
Right.
And if I needed to know the answer to an astrophysics question, part of the reason I'd call an astrophysicist, right, is that they know stuff I don't know. But there is also this idea that the methods that they use are shared with other fields by and large, that relatively few of the methods in any given field are intrinsic to that field only. And
I think that's somewhat true. I don't think that's, I don't think there is some overlap, you know what I mean? But like, suppose if you had a PhD in education, the overlap of like the techniques that you learned, you know, like how to learn and how to be a professional student, I think that would overlap. But then even like the names for the tools would change radically, you know. And this is
that's true. But
let me just sneak one thing in here. This is like
sure.
This is what you get for a master's in education. That is called situated cognition, which is basically like you think in a certain way in a certain situation, you know what I mean? That basically like you know what you know because you need to know it to fit a certain task. So I'll give an example. This is kind of interesting because it like, and I don't totally disagree with your point. And actually this finding I found like, I know the finding is accurate. I don't know if it is as like universal as it sounds.
Okay. Yeah.
But okay. So there were these kids in Brazil in, I think the 70s or 80s, who would sell candy on the beach. And Brazil was undergoing this like radical period of inflation, and every single day the value of the currency would change. And the kids would look at the the value of the currency that day and reprice the candy every single day, using ratios basically, and they would get it right.
Sure.
They knew the kind of absolute value, the actual value of the candy, and would sell it for the right price on that particular day. So then those same students, so the same kids, they weren't students because they were selling candy. These poor kids were not, they weren't in school. They were given a school style test where the math was identical to the math that they were doing on the beach for this, selling the candy. Basically, like literally the exact same ratios, but with different names and different, units, basically. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it because it was not situated in the same, around the same premise, basically.
Well, hang on a second, though. And you're telling me that the symbolism in which those questions were asked of them was the same symbolism that they were accustomed to using?
No, it was not. So it did not say, it was not that. So I wish I had the exact way the new problems were written. It was definitely not candy. You know what I mean?
No. I'm not talking. I'm not talking. But you're conflating two things. Well, it seems like you're conflating two things. One is the situatedness of it, right? Are we talking about candy, or are we talking about alligators? Or are we talking about ratios and GDP or whatever? Like
right.
That's okay. That's legit, right? But there's another piece, which is that, mathematicians look at the symbols of math and see certain patterns of thought. Everyone else looks at the symbols of math and sees unnecessary Greek lettering.
But these kids were, but yes, I understand that. But these kids were practicing math. You know what I mean? They actually did it on a daily basis. And then, but
sure,
when
but
it
did they
looked
do
like
it? Use
what
it
we call math? What's that?
Yeah, that's where I was going with this, right? When it looks like what we call math, but that's not because that's not because it's taken out of their situation. It's because it's taken out of their framework. I think that I wonder whether the people designing this experiment were sort of deeply aware of the degree to which they were biased in favor of thinking about and writing the symbols of math in a particular way, in a particular context.
I wish I had that. I wish I had the problem to look it up. I know the math was the same. I know that.
Okay, sure.
And
the procedure was the same.
It might have been alligators, and it might have been math symbols, but it might have been both too.
I'm just coming back to the. Yeah, go ahead.
Every like re-rendering of the ratio problem that they were solving on the beach, they were not able to solve separate from being on the beach with the candy. Yeah,
I got it. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I think part of. I think that the ability to take a procedure that's applied in some situated context and apply it somewhere else is, I think, in many contexts considered to be a hallmark of intelligence.
Yes,
and in
I agree
any
with that.
case, right, that degree of sort of abstraction of applying this process to this other situation, forget intelligence. It's certainly a property of modern life, right? You know the study that IQs have been going up at like 3 points per decade or something like that for a long time.
I did not know that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. There's a whole thing about that, and I mean I've read some pretty persuasive essays for the lay public that suggest to me that an important part of the reason for that, or maybe the entire reason for that, is that in the 1850s, if you were a farmer, like. Didn't mean you were dumb, but you didn't have call to think abstractly about much of anything. Mm-hmm. Whereas these days, like by the time you're 10, you are challenged to think abstractly in ways that adults of a previous era were not, because that's how our culture runs. Suggesting that intelligence in that context is not so much an innate property as like a style of thought to some degree. That is shaped by your environment and that kind of good stuff.
I would almost describe that as like an energetic thing that basically, like, a farmer in 1850 had to put so much of their, like, literally, like, what's the stuff that is ATP? Is that what it is? ATP, the energy stuff.
Adenosine triphosphate.
Very, very nice. Ooh, look at you.
Wow, how about that?
I was so proud of myself for coming up with the letters.
Yeah, it's like, when am I ever going to use that? Well, it's this podcast.
Yeah. We both learned that. We both used it, and who knows if it'll ever come in useful in our lifetimes again.
Yeah, well, I can check the box now because I've dropped it right here in this conversation.
Right. There you go. Yeah. Why am I learning this, chemistry professor? Because it'll be useful to you one time in your mid to late 40s.
Oh my God, so good.
So good. Everyone has their like supply of energy, right? And I think that a farmer in 1850 who is plowing a field with an ox has less energy to expend in other ways. So now I happen to live on a farm, and I happen to this morning postpone our podcast recording session because I was farming with my farmer landlord.
Yeah, sure.
Today we were pruning the grapevines. Randy is a very bright guy. He's 76 years old. He's been an organic farmer for a very long time, and I'm sure there were very bright farmers in the 1850s too. But I think he has more energy to apply to thinking about politics, taking in media, thinking about culture. We had a really interesting conversation today. We were like bandying about basically like what's the right level of cynicism, because in a way, even though Randy has a lot more experience on Earth than I do, I feel more cynical and like less hopeful than he is, and so we had this interesting conversation about, he shared some of the more hopeless things that he's seen and noticed in his lifetime, stuff that, like great disappointments, things that we, that I've read about, but I didn't experience firsthand. And he's capable of that. And I suppose that the more time goes on, the more able we'll be able to do it. Now I've got a separate question, which is basically, and I'm not sure how I feel about this. I don't know what the answer to this question is for me yet, but I do wonder what's the right amount of abstract thinking? What's like the, how do we live? How do humans live their best lives? I think abstract thinking is, I think it's a good thing generally. I think that we sometimes miss a lot our energy and put it towards things that are not necessarily good for us, that won't necessarily make our world a better place. In fact, will often make our world a worse place and make us less happy. I think we're going to have to get used to it and figure out what to. I mean, maybe everyone needs to do the. Okay, how good is my memory? The MIT. It's okay. Don't tell me.
I'm gonna let you just sit on this.
It's not puzzle tournament. I know that. No, that was my first shot at it.
Yeah, sure.
Quest. Is Quest in there?
To feel right.
Mystery Quest. Mystery. It's mystery. It's definitely mystery. Now this is where I should lose all credibility. You know what I mean? Like, what was that? It was 40 minutes ago when I learned this.
It's the MIT Mystery Hunt.
Mystery Hunt.
Yeah, that's just what it's called. It's what Brad called it back when he started it back in the who knows when, before I was there. So let me bring this back because I think there is a segue here to the subject test and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
So you're talking about abstract thinking. You're talking about how much energy is appropriate to put towards this stuff. And I want to suggest that there is real... I think there is real value in giving someone a test that says, what parts of what you have learned here do you think you ought to be retaining for future? Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what the subject tests do. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying they do it exceptionally well necessarily.
Right.
But I've always had the sense, well, okay, so first of all, there's a bunch of language tests, right? The subject tests, right? Mm-hmm. I assume, I don't know, I'm no language expert, but I would assume that if you can get 800 on one of those language tests, you probably speak the language pretty well. I remember that I went to high school with a number of people whose first language wasn't English, mm-hmm. and they routinely got an 800 on their native language, subject test.
And in a way, those are easy tests to write because the rules, the rules of grammar are pretty clear, you know what I mean? Like, and there are exceptions in some cases, but like there's a standard usage, and then there's also vocabulary, and you can just test those two things. And so like writing those tests should be easy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Pardon me for yawning. I'm still I'm underslept from my enthusiasm for the mystery hunt this last weekend. But the where I was going with this is that the Math 2 subject test, right, the level 2 math test, it always struck me as really interesting because it felt very curriculum independent, and yet it's testing stuff that's important. Like it has a pretty long history as being a problem solving test. Like, yes, you have to have taken Algebra 2 Trig or whatever to do this test, but like if you've taken that class, that doesn't guarantee that you can do this. And now I'm getting back to my beef with the ACT. The ACT has always been a test of, have you been paying attention in class? And like, that's legitimate. It's just that I don't care. Like, I don't care if someone was paying attention in class. I care whether they learned the thing they were supposed to learn. And this is the classic way this would come up, right? Is that the old SAT, the SAT has shifted in the ACT's direction, which I'm not a fan of in some ways. I know it's a lot of people are saying it's a much better test, and I'm sure they're right in many ways. But like the kind of math question I want to see on a test is, here is a situation wherein there's this thing that you want to know. Okay, great. What is the thing that is desired here, right? You know, you've got this situation, there are so many pieces of candy, whatever. What is the number of pieces of candy that Joe should take to the beach, or, you know, whatever, right? Whereas the ACT has always had this fondness for asking a question like, in a situation like this, where Joe has candy and blah, 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 which of the following is the equation Joe should be using to solve the problem? Okay. That is a much better test of, have you learned the methods that were taught in the class? And again, I'm not saying that's not valuable. Of course it is. It's just that personally, I do not care whether you know the sanctioned method for answering the question. I care whether you can figure out how many pieces of candy there are. And the sanctioned method for most people in most situations is an excellent choice. It's just not the only one. Like, you know, there are other ways to do it, you know. And so I and many other people I know, right, when asked a question like that, will routinely answer the question, and then given the answer, figure out which equation they think I should have used to solve it. Because of course, in thinking about these problems, right, I'm not only trying to memorize the method that's sanctioned by the class, I'm trying to think about, okay, in what circumstances is this the appropriate method? And in what circumstances are there better ways?
Let me jump in, because yes, I think this is a really good, we're leading to a good place here. And the question
we'll get there.
Yeah, no, I think we're kind of on it right now, honestly. The aim of the test, right? So that's kind of the question, and I think like that's like the main point of discussion in terms of whether or not the SAT subject test should be, you know, abolished, you know, forthwith. And same thing with the SAT essay. You can look at every single test and say, okay, these are its aims. Does it hit them? Do we care? You know what I mean? Do we care do we care to measure what we're measuring? So I would say,
it's not, is it a good test? It's not, is it a good test? It's like, okay, well, what is it trying to measure, and does it do a good job of that? Because reasonable people can disagree about whether that's a good thing to measure.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And they ought to. They ought to, like crazy. And like, let me lay it out. In you know, I think I'm going to do a pretty good job of like in terms that make sense to most people, say what's on these tests, like what are the aims of these tests, and what are the sort of like primary and almost entire sort of like catalog of thinking skills that you need to deploy on them. Okay. So I would describe, and this is in line with what you were just saying about the ACT, I think of the ACT as mostly a vocabulary test. Even in the math section, it's vocabulary, because it's basically, do you know the equation of a circle, and what happens in the H spot and the K spot and the R spot? Very simple. You know what I mean? There's 5 letters in that equation. Okay. And so yes, it does take a little bit of work, and it takes some math training to have gotten there and be comfortable with it. You've got to have that in your mind, but it's vocabulary ultimately, not comprehension or critical thinking. Calling that. Yeah. Same thing with grammar. Same thing with grammar. And if you think of the editorial English questions in the right way, they're kind of vocabulary too, because they're at least not vocabulary, they're at least procedural, where you're drawing the information from the same places each time. So from a test prep purveyor's point of view, the ACT is a wonderful test because it's like, hey, if your goal is to improve your score, all I need to do is teach you this vocabulary. If you're willing to put the time in, if you're going to be a good soldier, we are going to get a crazy good score. And it takes the right kid to do that, employ all those skills. But everyone who does gets the result because it's not because there isn't magic. There's hold on, hang on one sec. I'm just going to jump. I'm just going to jump to the other test. SAT is a narrower test, I would say, in terms of what it's in terms of the set of things that it's going after. Just in terms of like, if you're gathering all the content and saying this is all of the stuff you need to know, I think that SAT's scope is narrower.
You're talking about the post 2015, like the modern SAT.
Yeah, exactly. The one that they just got rid of the essay for, and then the old ones. That'd be really interesting too. And the debate starts there. Actually, real tiny aside.
No, that's all good.
Tiny aside.
Okay.
The documentary, The Test, and The Art of Thinking. Which I will like. I can recommend that. I'll say that it's worth seeing. But the best line I heard in there was basically the SAT told us, 10 years ago that their test was, the greatest measure of college readiness. 10 years later, they burned it down and wrote a brand new test. What happened? What was up with the old test and what was up with the test from 20 years ago, which was totally different from that one. So anyway, let me just hold that thought because let's stick with the tests that are actually available on the market right now.
Okay. Sure.
To me, the SAT right now is trying to test, and this included the essay, test you on a set of college skills that you will employ in college. I'm not sure about the math stuff, to be honest, because college math goes way beyond high school math. So that's actually like, I could be, you could share with me probably more insight in terms of what the exact, I mean, it's algebra. It's a ton of algebra and being really careful with that stuff. And actually, sorry, another slight tangent. It is also, applying the right strategy to the right problem and having, say, 3 different quadratic problems, quadratic equations on the test, and applying taking 3 completely different approaches in terms of working efficiently. Now, the reading
not
test,
a small scale. That is a very important.
Oh, it's very important. And by the way, I'm not saying it's not important. I guess I'm just saying it's like narrower. You know what I mean? Like the number of things it's testing, and I think this is intentional. That on the reading test, it is it's about finding evidence. Even the questions that are not evidence questions still require you to put your finger on something in the passage and be like, there it is. There's the justification. It also requires really, really good sort of almost like dictionary-like thinking about words and making sure that a word means just what you want it to mean. If it's not perfect, it's not right.
Well, I mean, that's the difference between reading something and passing your eyes over the word and having your own biases confirmed. Like there's a difference. There's
definitely a difference. And there's so many different ways to read too. And the method that they're going after, I think, is the collegiate one. You know what I mean? Which is basically you're going to write a paper on this thing. You need to understand it fluently, perfectly, and be able to dissect it. And that's a good skill. That is a skill that if you're going to college, which if you're taking the SAT, you're planning on going to college, you will deploy. So there's some value in measuring that skill for that specific reason. Now,
for sure.
Now, that wasn't the original point of the SAT ever. You know what I mean? It was completely different. The point was wildly different because it was about aptitude, which was like intellectual ability.
Wasn't the original SAT about trying to select grunts to put into the officer training program in the U.S. military?
Right.
Am I pulling that out of nowhere?
What did they call it?
Wasn't that a thing?
It was called was it the alpha test or the beta test? There's a name for like.
Oh, you're going way back.
Yeah, that's the test that was the SAT and then like became, got ported over.
Scholastic aptitude test.
Okay. So, so 2 more points. The essay that they just got rid of. The essay was essentially the subject test, not subject test, AP test in AP language. It was basically a not a rip, but pretty close to a rip of that in terms of saying what are the rhetorical devices.
The literature subject test and the AP.
Not the literature, the AP language test. Did I say lit? AP English language.
I don't know.
Because the lit test is like, let's read poems and, prose and like that to me is fun. I was a English major. But the language test is basically, what are the techniques? What are the tools? Show, point them out. So here's my question.
Okay.
Like, what do we want to measure? And I shouldn't even say we, because the funny thing is, I don't really care, strangely, what they want to measure. I want to help students get better at the test that measures that thing, but I don't get to make the decision on what skills.
Well, I mean, that explains why we disagree on this thing, I think, better than anything else. Like, and I was the co-founder and co-runner of an SAT prep company for years. Like, I get the value of, look, give me a game, let me read the rule book for the game,
right.
and let me help you become a good player of this game. And like, I'm not going to argue that's not a life skill. Of course that's a life skill. Like, whether it's corporate politics or, whatever, like, you are going to be playing a game that has rules and you need to be good at the game for your chosen field. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like 100% agree. That's a valid thing. And I think that, as you say, right, you can train a kid, you can train the right kind of kid to understand the vocabulary of the ACT at an appropriate level that allows that student to get a phenomenally high score on that instrument. Right. And again, yep, I agree 100%. I don't like the inherent bias in that suggests that the thing we want out of our kids is to get good at the games we invented. I want to have a piece that says, as an up-and-coming citizen in our culture, part of your job is to do game design. Part of your job is not just to jump through the hoops we made, but to decide what the right hoops should be. And that's why I liked the subject test in math too, and it's why I do AMC coaching these days. Okay? And it's also why I don't like the direction the AMC has been drifting in for the past few years, as a side note, which it has been doing for some very predictable and actually laudable reasons. It's just sort of anyway, we don't need to get into that. But
I'm interested. Maybe, I don't know, save that for the next episode.
I'm happy to get into it for sure. But like the thing is, like, there's always been a kind of student, right, who is a plugger, and you show them the rules and they will get the job done. And there's always been the kind of student who is good at tests and not good at turning in their darn homework. Right. And I think that those highlight two different modes of thinking, both of which have their place, both of which can be very, very valuable. And I read into getting rid of the subject tests some whiff of favoring the plugger over the test taker. And I don't like that. Yeah. Because, I mean, gee whiz, right? Like one of the stories that we tell about America, right, is that we're, about the US, is that we're super creative when we come up with new solutions, and like we think outside the box, and we're mavericks. And it's like, well, okay, act like it, right? Like, don't just test us on, can you check the boxes? Right. Now, that's not to say that getting rid of the subject tests is necessarily moving in that direction, but that is my general sense, and it's why I have that's why I would prefer to see them not going. Honestly, like, just to skip ahead in the conversation, right? Like, I think that the fact that the Math 2 and Physics subject tests no longer exist are going to make the AMC a much more popular test for students who are interested in showing off that not only have they learned the things their school is trying to teach them, but they can be very successful in sort of a region that school does not explicitly teach all the procedures or even all the facts for. It can be a really nice way to do that.
Anyway. I want to, this is good. I want to put a hat on what I'm saying, because I think we actually disagree less than you might think.
All right.
So
let's find out.
Above all other skills, above any other like educational skill, I'll throw two things out there. One is critical thinking, right? So the ability to basically like take in information and vet it and understand it, and apply it to your life or dismiss it. I mean, just all the things you can do with novel information and ways you can understand.
So basically, a combination of successful BS detection and the ability to leverage someone else's mental work to benefit your
100%,
own thing.
100%. So that's number one. And then the other one would be creative thinking, right? Which includes problem solving, which includes, artistic expression. I mean, so there's a lot in there, and it's a very, very rich, playground. And so those are the two things I love, that I want every student to have. And so when it comes to these tests, I'm not, if I have the opportunity to use one of those skills as the skill that's going to get a student to do better on the test, I'm all about it. But my other premise is basically like, let's learn these skills. Let's do this test their way. And then as of 1 p.m. on a certain Saturday, let's be done with it forever and get back to critical thinking and creative problem solving and have a good time and do the things in this world that are really, really worth doing. Because I see these tests as hoops, and I see 17-year-olds as professional hoop jumpers. It's like that is what that's what we've tasked them with, for better or worse. So let's make them really good at it so they can get out of that cycle.
See, you're talking about something really subtle here, and I think it's super important. I think we talk about it a lot in our other conversations. I think there's real value in just saying, okay, you know what? You got to jump through this hoop. Let's jump through the hoop cleanly. And then we move back to what we're doing. I totally respect that. And I do it myself.
Yeah, we all have to. Yeah.
Sure. I also think there's value in saying, you know what? We're not going to jump through this hoop. We're going to do this the right way. We're going to, that's too strong of a statement. We're not going to jump. We're not going to treat this as a hoop. Well, I'll tell you what, let me just say it this way. There's a big difference between training a student to jump through a hoop from the framework of, look, if we just do this thing, then we can put it behind us, versus privileging the hoops as worthy of your genuine attention. Right. And it's difficult to deconflate, though. I think you do a great job of it. You frame it very well.
I think I appreciate you drawing that distinction too, because, there are absolutely things I teach on the test where I'm like, hey, this is a really good one. This is, here's a technique, here's a grammar, piece of punctuation that you can use forevermore. And it's going to make you, like a more persuasive writer, whatever. Exactly. You're going to gain from this. And then there's other things where I'll teach them. I'm like, hey, this problem says there's 5 green marbles for every 3 red marbles, and you're not going to use it again because guess what? No one has bags of marbles anymore. You know what I mean? Like even the premise of the question is flawed. So anyway.
Yeah. Which reminds me, by the way, of one of my favorite marble in a bag questions.
Oh, great.
Should I take that incredible right turn?
I like it.
This, oh my God, I just love this. This came up in conversation the other day, and I just love this one. And I love it because it gave me such a headache the first time I read the proposed solution. And it was one of those good headaches where it's like, oh, I feel my brain stretching. Would you please stop that? And yet it's good for me. So this is great. So there's a bag that contains 5 marbles, 3 red, 2 white. Okay. You with me so far?
Yep.
Okay. Can't see into the bag. And you're going to pull marbles out of the bag one by one until you've either pulled all the red ones or pulled all the white ones. Oh. Okay. In other words, the game ends as soon as you pick the last red one or the last white one. And there's 3 reds and 2 whites, so you know when the game is over.
Okay.
You with me so far? Okay. So the question is, what's the chance that when you're done, wait, let me, oh boy, if I get the question wrong, this is going to be super embarrassing. Let me just see what was the premise there? So you play until the last marble of one color is right. What is the chance that the last marble you pull will be white? That's what it was. What's the chance that the last marble you pull will be white?
If I were to do it, and I think we should, I think this is a really good closer, and maybe we could even maybe we could pull in. I think probability is a really, really interesting math topic because it actually veers out of the procedural, or the procedures open up. You know what I mean? And picking the right one and going about it the right way is important. But if I were to do it, my instinct right now would be to map out all of the sequences. You know what I mean?
So one of the reasons that I like this question so much is that there are a lot of different ways to solve it, and that's completely legit, right? There are only 5 marbles. there are only so many different ordering. There are only so many different sequences. You know, like red, white, red is one of the sequences. Red, white is one. There are only so many sequences there, and you can just list them all out, and you can say, okay, great. In how many of these, right? They're all equally likely. So in how many of these is the white one the last one that I pull? I think that's completely legit. And there's also a bunch of sort of interesting ones like, well, if 2/5 of the marbles are white, then why wouldn't there be a 2/5 chance that
that's
the last
what I was
one
going to say
would be
is that
white?
the right answer?
Yeah, totally. No, it's not.
Interesting. Okay.
No, it's not. And if you're inclined to think that it should be, I would point out that which marble is last varies from instance to instance, and that turns out to screw with the probability in a way that's not so intuitive. And there's a bunch of things you can do there. But the reason that I like it so much is the you're gonna love this. So I hope you'll love it. If you pull, let's see now. So that we're asking for the chance that you pull a white marble last. So if you think about this, right? If you're pulling a white marble last, that means there's at least one red one left in the bag, right? And in fact, it means that all the ones left in the bag are red. Okay. And if you pull a red one last, that means all the marbles left in the bag are white. Are you cool with that? Okay. Well, here's the thing, right? So in asking what's the chance that we draw a white one last, we're simultaneously asking what's the chance that what is left is red. Okay? And you might even consider that whenever you end the game on a white marble, there's going to be some number of red marbles left. You could, after the game is over, keep picking them out. And in fact, you could keep picking them out until there's only one left. That doesn't change anything here. Right? If you're picking the last white marble, you can arrange to have exactly one red one left. So from that perspective, the chance that the last one you pick is white is exactly the same as the chance that the last one in your sequence is red. And that's 3/5, the right answer.
Wow. Nice.
Okay. And it turns out if you do all the sequences, or if you do some of the complicated, things that one does for probability problems, like, they all agree on that being the right answer. But the coloring that I bring to the SAT subject test discussion, right, is that memorizing a way to deal with that question is without merit. Like there's just not value in it. But beating your head against a mystery like that and really thinking about it, there's value there. And learning some techniques that often work in the context of mysteries, right? Like I could reframe that question and I could reframe that solution in terms of the kinds of problem-solving rules of thumb that ought to get applied to problems, right? One of the classic ones is think of the opposite situation, which is kind of what I'm talking about when I say if you draw a white marble, that means there are red ones left. That's thinking in terms of opposites, right? And there's a bunch of those techniques where it's like, you know what? I don't care if you know about the green marbles and the red marbles and the contrived probability problems, but I do care that you can deal with a mystery and have some ideas about, okay, how am I going to pick this apart? Because I think that if you have an interesting and, good job or whatever, right? If you're doing something interesting in the world, you're going to be faced with challenges that don't have a playbook, right? That don't have like a prearranged, here's how you do it, And so to just have some comfort with grappling with the unknown, I think is super valuable. And that's what I feel like people used to do with the SAT. Math 2 subject test.
I think that's great, man. I think that makes perfect sense to me. I would even say that like one of the skills that the don't say it. Oh my God.
Can I please say it?
Don't say it. Mystery. Don't say it. Mystery. It's not quest. Shut up. It's and I actually have a problem with the grammar of it because it's like,
oh, Ted, you are such a good Ted.
Because I have a problem with it. It's mystery hunt. And the reason the reason I remembered that is that like when I hear it, I'm like, well, what are you doing? Hunting for mysteries? It's like, no, the mysteries are there. You're hunting within mysteries, I suppose. But anyway, let's hold that thought. My point there was that that was my technique for finally maybe. Well, I did get it that time after about 15 seconds memorizing that name. But those skills, right? So mnemonics. That's mnemonics right there. Another one is literally being willing to struggle, right? Knowing that like you might not know the answer now.
What a good one.
And you,
right.
and like that's okay.
Yep.
That by itself.
Well, more than okay. Like you if you aren't experiencing discomfort, then the chance that you are growing is pretty close to zero.
Absolutely. No doubt.
You know? Yeah. And it's so funny because it doesn't mean that all discomfort is good for you. It just means that most of what's good for you has some discomfort in it. And so you got to be okay with that.
It's growing.
I just got, oh my God. Yeah, totally. So it turns out that my wife and daughter are away right now in a place with snow for the moment. And they, my daughter is grappling with learning to ski. And like, it seems so clear to me that like her problem isn't that she doesn't know how to ski. Her problem is that she doesn't like doing something she's not already good at. And it's like,
oh yeah.
You're going to have to figure that one out. I will help every way I can. But you know.
That's an interesting one. That's a great. Yeah. I mean, as my mother, the math teacher said, you know, one of the keys to math success is being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. I have said those words and they are true.
And I would agree with you that the SAT subject test, in particular, the math level 2 test had a lot of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the literature test had a little bit too. But yeah.
But like what I'm talking. So you're saying that I'm kind of conflating the math 2 test in specific with the subject tests in general. Yeah. I believe you. I don't know.
If you gave me my choice of those tests and said you can do one of these tests, immediately I'd pick math level 2 because it's like the most fun one for that reason.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. The physics had a lot of that stuff in it too. Like I cannot tell you how many students came to me and like their physics class hadn't told them how to do these problems. And I would teach them just a little bit of sort of intuition and vocabulary around not about how physics classes work, but how physics is like, you know, physics itself. Right. And then it would be like, well, yeah, but if that's true, then the answer to this would be this. And the answer to this would be this. And it's like, yeah, those are all the answers. Like that's how it works.
That's
right.
Delightful.
You know, and it's like, oh, we have to do physics instead of regurgitating what we learned in class. And it's like, yeah, there's a difference there. And yes. Right. Anyway,
this guy's Wes Carroll. I'm going to put a cap on this thing because this has been a really great conversation, and my brain's going to fry out at some point.
This has been Ted Dorsey. I really appreciate your making the time. This is always a really good time. I hope our listeners are more amused than annoyed by our constant digressions.
I for one, was entertained. You know, he's at wescarroll.com. I'm at tutorted.com, and but it's fun for us to do this, and we hope you like it, and we'll probably keep doing it whether you do or not because it is fun. So
good enough for me, man. Thanks again, Ted. Right. Thanks for hanging with us. Click subscribe, ring the bell, tell a friend, leave a comment. You know the drill.